10 seconds. That is all it took. A trail camera mounted to a pine tree in northern Wisconsin captured 10 seconds of footage that has been circling the internet for the past month. Nobody can explain what it shows. The camera was found knocked from its mount, face down in the dirt. The mounting bracket was bent at the base. The housing was cracked along one side as if something had gripped it and squeezed. But the SD card inside was intact. When the property owner pulled that card and loaded the footage onto his laptop, he saw something that made him lock every door in his house. The footage begins at the 2-second mark when the motion sensor triggers. Between two pine trunks, roughly 30 feet from the camera, something large is standing upright in the dark. The infrared flash catches it mid-stride. It is not a bear. It is not a person. The Dogman is bipedal, covered in thick dark fur, and it has the unmistakable head shape of a canine. Pointed ears sit high on the skull, a forward-projecting muzzle, wide shoulders tapering to a narrower waist, and it is walking directly toward the camera with a stride that looks purposeful. So before we go any further, make sure you hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. I read every single one of those comments, and honestly, some of the stories you guys share in there are more terrifying than anything I could come up with on my own. Alright, let us get into this. Over the next 8 seconds, the Dogman closes the distance to the camera. Frame by frame, it moves from the tree line toward the lens with a measured, deliberate pace. Its arms hang at its sides, swinging slightly with each step in a rhythm that looks natural and weighted. The shoulders are broad, far wider than any human frame I have ever seen. The fur catches the infrared light and shifts as the muscles underneath contract and release with each stride. By the 5-second mark, you can clearly see the pointed ears, triangular, upright, positioned high on the head. By the 7-second mark, the Dogman is close enough that the teeth are visible. The mouth is partially open. The lips are pulled back just enough to expose the upper canines. The eyes reflect the infrared with a flat, pale glow that makes your stomach drop because they are locked directly onto the camera lens. Then the last 2 frames happen, and this is where the footage goes from unsettling to terrifying. The Dogman surges forward. The image becomes a wall of motion blur, fur and muscle. One final frame shows a massive shoulder and upper chest, filling the entire field of view. Then the recording stops dead. That is when the camera was ripped from the tree. The property owner found it 18 feet from the mounting point, face down in the pine needles. The strap that secured it to the trunk was not untied. It was snapped. 10 seconds from first detection to destruction. The property owner, a man who has hunted and managed that timber parcel for over 15 years, told the person who originally posted the footage online that he had placed the camera to monitor deer activity along a trail between 2 ridges. He checked his cameras every 2 weeks. When he arrived at that station, the first thing he noticed was that the mounting strap was hanging loose from the tree. He found the camera in the undergrowth nearby. The lens housing was cracked and packed with dirt. Beyond the physical damage to the camera, what disturbed him most was the ground around the tree. There were impressions in the soft pine needle floor that did not look like any animal track he had ever seen in 15 years on that property. He described them as elongated with what appeared to be toe pad marks at the front, pressed deep into the soil. He loaded the SD card at home that evening and watched the footage once. He told the original poster that he watched it on his laptop in his kitchen with the lights on and his back to the wall. He watched it once and then put the card in a drawer and did not look at it again for 3 days. When he finally shared it, he asked that his name and the exact location of the property not be disclosed. I respect that request. What I can tell you is that the general area is consistent with one of the densest Dogman encounter corridors in the upper Midwest. I have watched hundreds of hours of trail camera footage over the years. I have covered Dogman encounters on this channel, going back to some of my earliest videos, and I want to tell you right now, this footage is different, not just because of the clarity. Although the image quality is remarkable for a standard infrared trail camera, it is different because of how the Dogman behaves. Every other piece of trail camera evidence I have analyzed shows a creature that is either passing through the frame, unaware of the camera, reacting with surprise, or turning away. This Dogman does none of that. It identifies the camera immediately, it approaches with intention, and it destroys it. That behavioral pattern is what made me decide to do something I have never done before with Dogman evidence. I wanted to remove my own bias entirely. I wanted to take the human eye out of the equation and see what happens when you feed this footage into an artificial intelligence system designed to classify biological subjects. I wanted the cold numbers, the data points stripped of opinion and interpretation. What I got back kept me up at night, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I want to walk you through each finding one by one because the details matter. Each individual result is interesting on its own, but when you stack them together, the cumulative picture becomes something that I do not think can be easily dismissed by anyone who is willing to look at it objectively. The AI analysis started with motion tracking. Frame by frame, the system isolated every measurable element of movement in the footage: center of gravity displacement, limb oscillation frequency, joint articulation angles, stride length relative to body height, the rhythm and cadence of the gait cycle. These are the same metrics that biomechanical researchers use in university laboratories to study how animals and humans move. The system has been trained on thousands of hours of reference material, covering every known bipedal and quadrupedal species documented on camera. It knows what a person looks like when they walk. It knows what a bear looks like when it stands up. The first result came back on the gait analysis, and it was immediately strange. The AI flagged what it categorized as a lupine-like gait pattern. For those of you not familiar with the term, lupine means wolf. The system detected a stride pattern that shares fundamental characteristics with how wolves move, specifically in the hip rotation, the pelvic tilt during forward locomotion, and the way the rear legs track through each stride cycle. But here is where it becomes difficult to explain. The subject in the footage is walking upright on two legs. No known wolf walks bipedally. No known canid walks bipedally for sustained periods. The AI flagged that contradiction as an anomaly it could not resolve. The second finding was the proportions, and this is where I started to feel the hair stand up on my neck. The system mapped the Dogman's limb ratios across every usable frame and compared them against its entire database. The arms were unusually long relative to the torso. The shoulder width was massive, disproportionate to the hip width, in a way that no human body displays. The legs showed a digitigrade structure, meaning the Dogman was walking on the balls of its feet, with the heel elevated, the same stance a dog or wolf uses when standing. But the overall body plan was anthropomorphic: 2 arms, 2 legs, upright posture, forward-facing head. The system estimated the height by measuring against the known dimensions of the pine trunks visible in the frame and returned a figure of 8.1 feet, 247 centimeters. I need to stop here and explain why that number matters. 8 feet is well outside the range of any normal human being. The tallest verified people in medical history topped out around 8 feet 11, and those individuals suffered from conditions that made sustained movement extremely difficult. What this footage shows is a subject that moves fluidly at 8 feet, with no visible impairment, no stiffness, no wobble, no compensation patterns. The AI found no evidence of stilts or any mechanical augmentation. The third layer of analysis targeted the fur, and I will be honest, this is where I expected the whole thing to collapse. If someone faked this with a costume, the fur is where you catch it every time. Synthetic materials interact with light differently than natural animal hair. Nylon produces a reflective sheen under infrared that natural fur does not. Polyester creates visible texture artifacts when you zoom in. Even the highest quality Hollywood creature suits produce telltale indicators under close analysis. I have reviewed every major Dogman hoax attempt that has surfaced online, and in every case the suit gives itself away in the fur. The AI scanned every frame where the Dogman was illuminated by the infrared flash. No synthetic material signature was detected. The fur absorbed and reflected light in patterns consistent with natural animal hair. More importantly, it moved independently of the body beneath it. In a costume, the exterior fabric stretches and bunches as a single unit because it is a single unit. In this footage, the fur shifts over the muscle structure underneath, responding to the contractions beneath the way real animal hair responds to the living tissue it grows from. I have reviewed dozens of costume attempts. Everyone fails this test. This footage did not. I sat with that finding for a while before I moved on to the next layer of analysis. Because if the fur is real, if the AI is correct that the covering on this subject is genuine biological hair growing from living tissue, then the costume theory does not just weaken. It collapses entirely. You cannot fake natural fur behavior under infrared analysis. You can make a good visual costume. You cannot make one that passes spectrometric inspection frame by frame. It is not possible with current materials technology. The fourth finding involved the facial structure. In the frames where the Dogman is within 10 feet of the camera, the infrared captures enough detail for a facial geometry analysis. What it mapped was a forward-projecting muzzle approximately 9 inches in length, wide-set eyes with a reflective tapetum lucidum, pointed ears high on the cranium, and visible dentition consistent with a large carnivore. The system compared these measurements against every known primate and canid species in its database. The Dogman's facial geometry matched neither category. It returned the same classification it had been returning throughout the entire analysis. Unidentified biological subject. No match found, not because the data was insufficient, but because nothing in the database matched. I want to be completely clear about what I am saying and what I am not saying. I am not claiming that an AI has proven the Dogman is a real species. What I am telling you is that an AI system was given clear footage of something walking on 2 legs, and after measuring every available data point, it returned a result that should make skeptics uncomfortable. Real subject, real environment, real biological motion, no evidence of digital manipulation, no evidence of physical fabrication, and no known biological classification available. The machines do not have an opinion. They just measure. And the measurements do not fit anything we have a name for. Now I know what some of you are thinking. AI can be wrong. The system could have been tricked. Garbage in, garbage out. And you are right that AI systems are not infallible. But here is what makes this different from a human opinion. The AI does not care about the outcome. It does not want the Dogman to be real. It does not want the footage to be fake. It does not have a YouTube channel to promote or a reputation to protect. It does not experience fear or excitement or confirmation bias. It processes data. It compares measurements. And it returns results. When a human expert tells you this is a bear, that expert is filtering through their career, their reputation, their fear of ridicule, and their existing belief system. When an AI tells you it cannot classify the subject, that is the data talking and nothing else. I also want to point out something about the behavioral analysis. The AI tracked the Dogman's approach trajectory and flagged it as deliberate target acquisition. The Dogman did not stumble into the frame. It did not wander past and notice the device. It identified the camera from 30 feet away, altered its course to approach directly, and closed the distance at a steady pace the system characterized as purposeful locomotion toward a fixed point. That is predatory behavior. Bears do not do that with trail cameras. Deer do not do that. Humans in costumes generally do not know where trail cameras are mounted on private property in remote timber. If this footage existed in a vacuum, I would still find it compelling, but I would understand the skepticism. One trail camera clip is easy to dismiss, but this footage does not exist in a vacuum. It exists within a pattern of encounters, sightings, and folklore that stretches back centuries across North America. And this is what separates the Dogman from most other paranormal topics. This is not a ghost story where the evidence is always ambiguous. This is not a UFO sighting where the lights could be explained by weather or aircraft. The Dogman has a physical footprint. It leaves tracks. It leaves scratch marks. It leaves behind shed fur. It damages property. It kills livestock. And it appears on cameras. The evidence is tangible and measurable, and it has been accumulating faster in the last decade than in the previous century combined. The Dogman has been part of indigenous oral tradition for as long as those traditions have been recorded. The Ojibwe people of the Great Lakes region, whose ancestral territory includes the forests of Michigan and Wisconsin, where modern sightings concentrate, spoke of beings that could shift between animal and human form. Their traditions described creatures tied to the deep forests and waterways that were not animals in the way a deer or a bear is an animal. They were something else, something aware, something that watched. The Shawnee people described large, upright, canine creatures that patrolled territorial boundaries. Creatures understood to be dangerous because they were intelligent and did not tolerate trespass. The Navajo traditions of the Southwest contain extensive accounts of skinwalkers, beings that take animal form and move through the night with purposes that are always to be feared. Among the forms most frequently associated with skinwalker accounts is the wolf that walks on two legs, a being that moves with human intelligence inside an animal body. The Navajo do not discuss skinwalkers casually. It is not a campfire story to them, it is spiritual reality, and many traditional Navajo people will not speak about them with outsiders. That level of seriousness, that weight of genuine belief maintained across generations, tells you something important about how real these encounters feel to the people who experience them. The Iroquois Confederacy of the northeastern woodlands had their own traditions of canine beings that acted as guardians or enforcers of boundaries humans were not meant to cross. The Algonquin described the Wendigo, which, while typically a different type of creature, shares behavioral characteristics with Dogman encounters, territorial aggression, nocturnal activity, the sense that the creature is not merely an animal but something operating with deliberate awareness. The Cherokee people described Wampus Cat and Yuah legends that share significant physical overlap with Dogman descriptions. Large predatory beings that walked upright, possessed intelligence beyond ordinary animals, and inspired a fear in witnesses that went beyond the normal reaction to a dangerous predator. What gets me every time I dig into this material is the consistency across cultures that had no contact with each other. The Ojibwe in Michigan and the Cherokee in North Carolina, separated by hundreds of miles and completely independent cultural development, both describe an upright canine creature associated with deep forest, territorial behavior, and an intelligence that feels wrong. And this is not limited to North America. European folklore is saturated with wolfmen accounts that predate Hollywood by centuries. Norse berserkers channeled wolf spirits. Germanic folklore described the wolfsmensch. French loup-garou accounts stretch back to the medieval period and describe encounters that sound almost identical to modern Dogman reports. At some point, you have to ask whether thousands of years of independent cultures were all making up the same lie or describing the same truth. The first documented modern Dogman report comes from Wexford County, Michigan in 1887. A group of lumberjacks reported a creature that stood upright like a man but had the head of a dog. It watched them from the timber line, standing motionless, then dropped to all fours and vanished into the forest with a speed that none of them could reconcile with its size. That report sat in a newspaper archive for decades. Nobody connected it to anything larger because the pattern had not yet been recognized. But once you start mapping what came after, the picture becomes impossible to ignore. In the 1930s, a night watchman at a fish hatchery in Jefferson County, Wisconsin, reported a creature digging into a Native American burial mound. When he confronted it with a flashlight, the dogman stood upright from a crouch, turned to look at him, and walked away on two legs. He described dark fur, a canine head, and shoulders as wide as a doorframe. He was told it was probably a bear. He maintained until the day he died that it was not. In the 1960s and 1970s, reports began emerging from Bray Road near Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Multiple independent witnesses described a large wolf-like creature that ran on its hind legs, left scratch marks on vehicles, killed livestock without eating the carcasses, and displayed territorial awareness over a specific geographic area. Those sightings were investigated by journalist Linda Godfrey, whose research brought the Dogman into mainstream awareness. As I covered in an earlier video on the Bray Road cases, Godfrey documented over 100 independent reports, and the physical descriptions remained remarkably consistent across people who had never met each other. What made the Bray Road cluster particularly significant was the caliber of witnesses. A county animal control officer encountered the dogman while investigating livestock deaths. A district land manager saw it cross a highway in broad daylight. Multiple farmers found carcasses of large animals, killed, but not consumed, crushed or broken rather than bitten. The Michigan Dogman legend crystallized further in 1987 when a radio DJ named Steve Cook recorded a novelty song about the creature. Instead of laughs, the station was flooded with calls from people sharing their own encounters. Farmers, hunters, truckers, families who had seen something in the Michigan woods and never told anyone because they feared the reaction. Cook later said the volume and sincerity of those calls changed his perspective entirely. He had written a joke. The people calling in were not joking. I think about that story a lot because it mirrors what happens on this channel. Every time I post a Dogman video, the comments fill up with people who have been carrying their own encounters in silence, sometimes for decades. They do not post for attention. Most of them create anonymous accounts specifically to share their story, without it being connected to their real name. They post because they have been looking for someone who takes this seriously, and when they find that, the relief is overwhelming. I have received hundreds of messages from viewers at this point. Some are vague, some are clearly influenced by other stories, but a significant percentage contains specific details about the Dogman that match across accounts in ways that strangers on the internet should not be able to coordinate. The height, the fur color and texture, the way the Dogman's eyes reflect light, the transition from bipedal to quadrupedal movement, the territorial behavior, and most importantly, the feeling witnesses describe, a sense that they were being evaluated by something intelligent that had already decided whether they lived or died before they even knew it was there. That last detail is the one that haunts me the most, because it matches exactly what the footage shows. The Dogman in this clip does not panic. It does not run. It evaluates the camera, makes a decision, and acts on that decision with precision. That is not animal instinct, that is cognition. The encounter reports are where this story takes on a weight that statistics and AI analysis cannot fully capture. Behind every data point is a person whose life changed the moment they saw something they could not explain. I want to make something very clear before I share these accounts. I am not a journalist, I am not a scientist. I am a guy with a channel who has spent years researching this subject because I believe it matters. But when people reach out to me with their encounters, I apply the same basic credibility filters that any investigator would. I look for internal consistency. I look for specific sensory details that suggest genuine experience rather than fabrication. I look for reluctance to share, because in my experience, people who are making things up want to talk. People who have seen a Dogman do not want to talk. They need to talk. There is a difference. Nobody benefits from coming forward with a Dogman sighting. There are no book deals. There is no money in telling your coworkers you watched a 7-foot canine stand up on 2 legs in your headlights at 2 in the morning. What there is, and I have heard this from dozens of people who contacted this channel, is mockery, professional consequences, strained relationships, friends who stop calling. The social cost of reporting a Dogman encounter is brutal and immediate, and it never fully goes away, and yet people keep reporting them, year after year, decade after decade, in the same areas, with the same descriptions. That fact alone should give every skeptic pause. A county sheriff's deputy in Michigan was driving night patrol along a rural highway bordered by heavy timber. Something crossed the road 100 yards ahead. He described a Dogman at least 8 feet tall, upright, with pointed ears, a long muzzle, and eyes that caught the headlights with a dull reddish glow. The Dogman stopped in the road and looked directly at the cruiser for 3 to 4 seconds. Then it pivoted and moved into the tree line with a speed the deputy said seemed physically impossible for something that large. He said it covered 30 feet in what felt like 2 strides. This was a trained law enforcement officer with years of service. He was carrying a duty weapon with a full magazine. And he told the investigator that all the firepower on his belt did not feel like it would have made a difference. He sat in his cruiser for 20 minutes after the Dogman disappeared before he could bring himself to drive away. He never reported it through official channels. He told one colleague he trusted and swore him to silence. The story only came out years later when he felt enough time had passed. He said the hardest part was not the encounter itself. The hardest part was going back on patrol the next night and driving that same stretch of road. He said for months afterward, every shadow at the tree line made his heart rate spike. That man gained nothing from telling his story. He risked his career, his reputation, and the respect of his peers. And he told the truth anyway because carrying it alone had become heavier than the consequences of speaking. A hunter, with over 30 years of experience in the Daniel Boone National Forest, was walking a ridgeline in early November when he found tracks in fresh snow. The prints showed a bipedal creature with a stride length exceeding 5 feet. Each print was elongated, showing toe pads and claw impressions. He followed the tracks for a quarter mile before they transitioned abruptly from bipedal to quadrupedal. The Dogman had dropped to all fours and continued into a steep ravine. In 30 years of hunting black bear, wild boar, and every large animal in eastern Kentucky, he had never seen a track pattern showing a transition from 2 legs to 4. He told me he stood at the edge of that ravine for a long time, staring down into the underbrush where the tracks disappeared. He said every instinct he had developed over 3 decades in the woods was telling him not to follow, not because of what he might find, but because of what might find him first. He photographed the tracks before the snow melted and kept those photographs in a folder on his phone that he shows to no one unless they bring the subject up first. He did not call the police. He did not contact the media. He did not post the photographs online. He told 2 members of his hunting group, and both of them stopped entering the woods after dark from that point forward. One of them sold his hunting lease on a parcel adjacent to where the tracks were found. 30 years of experience in the most rugged terrain in the eastern United States, and a set of tracks in the snow was enough to change the way those men interacted with the forest for the rest of their lives. A family in rural Ohio experienced repeated nighttime visits over 3 weeks. Their 2 German shepherds, dogs that had never feared anything, refused to go outside after sunset. They would flatten against the floor and whine if the back door opened after dark. Heavy footsteps sounded on the gravel driveway. Deep scratch marks appeared on the garage siding, high on the wall where no local wildlife could reach. Security cameras captured a large, dark, upright shape moving along the tree line. They sent the footage to 3 wildlife experts. One said bear, one said too grainy. One never responded. The father of the family told me that the worst part was not the sounds or the scratches. It was watching his dogs change. Animals that had bounded through that yard their entire lives, that had chased raccoons and stood their ground against coyotes, were now cowering behind the couch at sunset. He said a dog knows things that a person does not. A dog can tell the difference between a normal threat and something that should not exist. And his dogs had made their determination. They contacted their county animal control office. An officer came out, looked at the scratch marks, measured their height on the wall, and told the family he had no explanation. He suggested they might want to install motion-activated lights and consider getting a larger caliber firearm. He did not file a report. He did not follow up. The family still lives in that house. The dogs still will not go outside after dark. Nobody has given them an answer. A viewer from Indiana contacted me after watching one of my earlier videos. He is a retired military veteran with 2 combat tours. In the fall of 2019, he was bow hunting alone, sitting in a tree stand 18 feet off the ground at dusk. He heard movement below and assumed deer. The movement stopped directly beneath his stand. He looked down and saw a Dogman crouching at the base of his tree, looking up at him. It held eye contact for what felt like an eternity. Then it stood upright, and he realized it could have reached his platform with extended arms. It turned and walked away through the timber on 2 legs without making a sound. This man had faced enemy combatants in Afghanistan. He had been under fire. Nothing in his entire military career scared him the way that Dogman looking up at him scared him. He said the intelligence in its eyes was what got to him. It was not the blank stare of an animal. It was something that understood what he was and decided on its own terms to leave. He has not hunted alone since. He told me something else that stuck with me. He said when the Dogman stood up from the base of the tree, it did not rush. It did not scramble to its feet the way a startled animal would. It rose with a deliberate, fluid motion that suggested it had been crouching comfortably and simply decided to stand. The way a person stands up from a chair, not the way a wild animal reacts to being discovered. He said that detail told him everything he needed to know. The Dogman was not afraid of him. It was never afraid of him. It had chosen to sit at the base of his tree and look up at him, and it chose to leave when it was finished looking. I share these encounters not to frighten anyone, but to put the trail camera footage into its proper context. This is not an isolated incident. The Dogman in this footage is doing exactly what witnesses have been describing for generations. Watching, evaluating, making decisions, acting with a purpose that goes beyond animal instinct and enters something closer to strategic thinking. And now we have it on camera. There is another dimension to this that I feel I need to address, and it is something that comes up constantly in the comments section on this channel. Multiple people have reached out to me claiming that when they reported their Dogman encounters to wildlife agencies, park services, or law enforcement, their reports were either ignored, dismissed without investigation, or in a few cases, actively discouraged from being filed at all. One viewer told me he reported tracks and a sighting near a state park in Michigan, and the ranger he spoke to told him to stop talking about it because it would affect tourism. Another viewer, a former Park Service employee, told me that there was an informal understanding at his station that certain types of reports were to be filed under general wildlife disturbance and never followed up on specifically. He would not go into more detail than that because he still has colleagues in the service. I cannot verify these claims independently, and I want to be careful about making accusations I cannot back up. But the pattern of reports being suppressed or ignored is consistent enough, across enough witnesses, that I think it deserves attention. If even a fraction of these accounts are accurate, it means there is a systematic unwillingness at the institutional level to engage with evidence that challenges the accepted catalog of North American wildlife. Whether that unwillingness comes from fear of ridicule, concern about public panic, or something more deliberate, the effect is the same. Evidence disappears. Reports go unfiled. Witnesses are told they saw a bear or a coyote when they know they did not. And the Dogman continues to operate in a space between official denial and first-hand experience, documented by the people who see it, but ignored by the institutions that should be investigating it. The geography of Dogman sightings is something I have been personally mapping for a long time, and the patterns are too consistent to be accidental. These encounters cluster in specific regions that share environmental characteristics, which make biological sense for a large predator. Michigan is the epicenter. The northern Lower Peninsula and Upper Peninsula produce more Dogman reports per decade than anywhere else. Michigan contains millions of acres of continuous forest, vast river systems, and one of the densest deer populations in North America. The Manistee, Huron, and Pigeon River forests create an unbroken corridor of habitat. Wisconsin mirrors that pattern. The Checkamega-Nicolet National Forest covers over 1.5 million acres. The Kettle Moraine provides edge habitat. The trail camera footage we are discussing was recovered from a private timber parcel surrounded by thousands of acres of unbroken forest. It fits perfectly. Ohio's encounters cluster along the Appalachian foothills, where deep hollows and forested ridgelines extend for miles without a road crossing. Kentucky's reports trace the Daniel Boone National Forest and Red River Gorge, terrain so dense that people have gotten lost within a mile of maintained trails. Indiana concentrates in the southern hill country. The entire Appalachian chain produces a steady stream of reports that rarely makes the news, but the corridors extend further than most people realize. Reports out of West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest have been increasing steadily over the past decade. The mountains of Western Virginia and the Blue Ridge produce occasional encounters that match the Dogman profile precisely. Tennessee's reports concentrate in the Great Smoky Mountains and the Cumberland Plateau. Even the Ozark region of Missouri and Arkansas has produced a handful of credible Dogman encounters in heavily forested terrain that shares the same characteristics as the Great Lakes hotspots. What ties all of these locations together is not just forest cover. It is the combination of dense timber, low human population density, abundant water, a robust prey base of deer and smaller game, and critically, the kind of terrain that creates natural movement corridors. Ridgelines, river valleys, ravines that connect one watershed to the next without ever breaking above the canopy line. A large, intelligent predator using those corridors could travel hundreds of miles without ever being seen by a human being. I spent months plotting every verified report onto a single map. The sighting locations trace a corridor. Not a random scatter, but a connected pathway from the Great Lakes, through the Ohio River Valley, down the Appalachians, and south through the Smokies. That corridor follows the densest remaining forest cover east of the Mississippi. The sighting density correlates almost perfectly with the intersection of forest cover and water systems. Reports come from the edges where deep forest meets cleared land, the river bottoms with natural travel corridors, the ridgelines where something large can move between watersheds without crossing a road. The map reads exactly like a predator movement study. There is also a seasonal component most researchers overlook. Sightings spike in late fall and early spring, transitional periods when prey animals move and food sources shift. That is exactly what you would expect from a biological organism operating within an ecosystem. Imaginary creatures do not follow seasonal patterns. Real animals do. I also noticed something in the data that I have not seen discussed anywhere else. The time of day distribution is heavily skewed toward the hours between 10 at night and 4 in the morning. The Dogman is overwhelmingly a nocturnal phenomenon. The rare daytime sightings tend to occur during overcast conditions or in heavily shaded terrain where the light levels are low. That behavioral pattern is consistent with a large predator that has adapted to avoid the one thing in its environment that poses the greatest threat to its concealment: us, humans. We are a daytime species. Our eyes are optimized for sunlight, and the Dogman appears to have organized its entire activity pattern around our limitations. If you were designing a habitat map for a large, intelligent, nocturnal predator that wanted to avoid detection, you could not do better than what these sighting reports draw. The habitat is there, the prey base is there, the cover is there, every ecological box is checked. And before anyone brings up the standard objection, if the Dogman is real, why has no one produced a body? Fair question. I think about it constantly. But the history of biology is a history of things we were certain did not exist, right up until the moment someone proved they did. The mountain gorilla was not confirmed by Western science until 1902. A 2,000-pound primate avoided formal documentation until the 20th century. The giant squid was not photographed alive until 2004. The saola, a large forest-dwelling antelope in Vietnam, was not discovered until 1992. New large mammal species are still being described in the 21st century in forests far smaller than those of eastern North America. The forests of eastern North America contain over 700,000 square miles of unbroken timber. Canopy so thick that aerial surveillance cannot penetrate it. Terrain so rugged that entire watersheds have never been walked by a human. If something intelligent evolved to avoid detection in that landscape, it could remain hidden indefinitely. And apparently it has. Let me bring this back to the footage. After the folklore spanning thousands of years, the modern encounters spanning over a century, the witness testimony from law enforcement and military veterans and career hunters, and the geographic pattern tracing a perfect predator corridor, this 10-second clip takes on a different weight. This is not a blurry shape in the woods. This is clear footage of a bipedal canine creature walking toward a camera with purpose and intelligence in one of the most active Dogman corridors in the country, displaying behavior consistent with a territorial predator that identified a surveillance device and eliminated it. The AI confirmed the motion was real. The subject was biological. The proportions were outside any human range. The fur was natural, and the classification was unknown. That is not an opinion. That is measurement. I'm going to play the footage one more time. Watch the way the Dogman moves between those trees. Watch how it identifies the camera from 30 feet away. Watch the ears. Watch the teeth. Watch the eyes lock onto the lens. Watch those last 2 frames when the world becomes nothing but fur and motion blur before the recording dies. If this is a hoax, then someone built a suit that fooled an AI designed to detect fabrication. Someone walked in it with a gait matching no human profile. Someone stood 8 feet tall in Wisconsin and moved with the mechanics of a biological organism. Someone deployed it in front of a remote camera on private property, destroyed the camera, and walked away without ever claiming credit. That is what the hoax theory requires, and I personally think that explanation takes more faith than the alternative. Or you can consider what the evidence points toward, that the indigenous peoples were right, that the lumberjacks in 1887 were right, that the Bray Road witnesses were right across 3 decades, that the sheriff's deputy was right, that the hunter in Kentucky was right, that the family in Ohio was right, that the combat veteran was right about what looked up at him from the base of his tree, and that the AI returned the only honest answer available. Something is there, something real, something biological, something that does not exist in any database on Earth. I believe we are closer than ever to a definitive answer. The technology is catching up. The AI tools are getting sharper. The cameras are getting better. And people are finally taking this seriously. Not as entertainment, not as folklore, as investigation. When I started this channel, I was a guy with an interest in the unexplained and a microphone. I did not expect to become the person that hundreds of Dogman witnesses reach out to because they have nowhere else to go. I did not expect to find myself spending months mapping sighting corridors and comparing indigenous folklore across cultures. I did not expect the evidence to be this compelling, and I did not expect the AI to return results this difficult to dismiss. But here we are. And I think we owe it to every witness who risked their reputation, every indigenous elder who tried to warn us, and every person who saw something in the woods that changed their life, to take this evidence seriously, not to accept it blindly, not to abandon critical thinking, but to look at it with the same rigor and honesty that we would apply to any other body of evidence. That day is coming. The evidence keeps accumulating. The witnesses keep coming forward at personal cost. The sightings keep clustering in the same corridors, and the machines we built to see what human eyes cannot keep returning results that confirm what the forests have always known. Something walks in those woods that we do not have a name for. Something 8 feet tall with the head of a wolf and the posture of a man. Something intelligent enough to avoid detection for over a century. And something real enough that when we pointed our best tools at the evidence, the tools could not explain it away. If this changed how you think about the Dogman, hit the like button and subscribe, because this is not the last time I'm going to feed evidence into an AI and see what comes back. The question is no longer whether something is out there. The question is how long we can keep pretending it is not. For more stories like this, consider subscribing.